What future for Colombia after more than half a century of civil conflict with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, known as the FARC? It looks like an historic peace deal is finally drawing that conflict to a close. And it's won President Juan Manuel Santos the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, the President joins me today here in Paris. Many thanks for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
So there's good news in Colombia. The ink is dry on that peace deal and implementation is going to plan.
Yes, I think something very important happened. 100% of the weapons that were in the hands of the FARC have been commissioned to the United Nations. This is really the end of the FARC because there's a group which was an armed group, now has no arms. So they disappear as a guerrilla group, as an armed group. Now they become a political party and they come into legality, which is what peace is all about.
How can you know that 100% of those weapons have been decommissioned? How can you be so certain?
Well, one never knows if it's 100% or not, but we have each member of the guerrillas registered. They have to sign a pledge that they will never use arms again. Each arm is registered. It's a very serious process. And if you compare the process here with the FARC with other peace processes around the world, this is probably the most serious and the most detailed in the sense of the control of the decommissioning of the arms.
But your critics will say that you've been too lenient on the FARC in your bid to get this peace deal, in your bid to get this decommissioning. What do you say to that?
Well, my critics, what they want is for me to simply disappear the FARC through military means. This would have prolonged the war for 30 or 40 more years. Or they wanted me to put them in jail for 40 years. If you ask them to go to jail for 40 years, they will never give up their arms. So in a peace process, you always have to draw a line between peace and justice.
But it's ironic, isn't it? Because you said, yes, the world recognizes this peace process and the way it has to be implemented. But back home, you're not very popular. Your popularity ratings are extremely low. How do you explain that?
Because making war is very easy and very popular. I was Minister of Defense, very effective. That's why I was elected president. Making peace means you sit down with your enemies and you start making transactions in order to achieve that peace. And people don't like the FARC. They have committed all kinds of atrocities for the last 50 years. So to see the person who was so effective militarily against them, sitting down and making concessions, this is something which is not very popular or much accepted. But let me tell you, peace is much better than the war. And Colombia will flourish after this peace deal as never before.
Well, you say that, but then there's elections coming up in just next year, and you can't stand in those elections. And, you know, members of the opposition are very keen to unpick this peace deal. So are you convinced that this will continue after your administration?
Well, peace is irreversible right now. Nobody, whoever wins the election, can go back. To think that the FARC will be armed again and then go to the mountains and keep shooting, this is something
But they're very upset about the fact that the FARC are being given places in government, for example, so that could possibly be reversed.
There is, the Constitution today is what allows the FARC to become members of parliament, but this is part of the peace deal anywhere in the world. If you compare what we have done in Colombia with other peace processes, this is a very serious process where for the first time in the history of the world, an armed conflict, a guerrilla group submits its weapons and accepts to be judged and condemned. This had never happened before. There's going to be no impunity.
This is a peace deal where you have, although you say, you know, it's a Colombian peace deal, you have had to kind of rely also on the international community for support. You've recently met Donald Trump at the White House. How do you gauge his support for the peace process?
Well, he was very clear in the press conference and in the meetings that we had.
He didn't mention the peace process in the press conference.
He said his support for Colombia, for support in the Congress. The Republican Party voted to increase the support for the post-conflict, so they could not be more clear in their intentions. We fortunately have had a very good bipartisan relationship, both with the Democrats and the Republicans, and what I did in my last visit to Washington is to ratify that relationship.
And obviously you are also working with the United States in the fight against drugs, and that seemed to take up more of Donald Trump's attention, at least to the outside media, than the peace deal. He was pretty categorical in his approach in the fight against drugs, and he just said walls work. Do you agree with him?
Drug trafficking is like a chain. We have to fight each link of that chain with the appropriate methods. We have to be very, very hard on the intermediaries, on the people who make the profits. We have to be less hard on the peasant and the consumer. The consumer here in Europe, the consumer in the United States, that's part of the problem also. So there's a co-responsibility. The United States and Europe have a responsibility, and what Colombia is trying to achieve is a more effective and pragmatic approach.
Does building walls come into that pragmatism?
If you build a wall, the drugs will go around the wall. So what you need is a more comprehensive and pragmatic approach to be more effective. The best walls that you can build is economic development for Central America, for South America, for people not to be to have the incentive to go to the north, to the United States, or to Europe. The best wall is economic development in those countries.
So when it comes to economic development, the cocaine trade is a problem for Colombia. Colombia is the biggest exporter in the world of cocaine.
We still are, and Europe and the United States are the biggest consumers.
So yes, are they working hand in hand with you on this?
We are working hand in hand with the United States, with Europe. This is a global problem that has to be approached globally. One country cannot win the war on drugs. Two countries cannot win the war on drugs. It has to be a multilateral approach, and that's what we are in Colombia are trying to achieve to, again, fight every link of the chain in drug trafficking.
Now, you mentioned the European Union as a partner. The European Union has pledged close to 95 million euros for building peace. What are you going to use that money for?
Many things. Demining, for example. After Afghanistan, we were the second most mined country in the whole world. We have to demine. We have to give the peasants and the people who are in the areas of conflict an alternative. Build roads, build schools, build hospitals. We have to retrain the members of the guerrilla groups to become normal citizens. There's a big challenge there of the post-conflict process.
So this obviously hasn't been a very easy path driving this peace deal. What role models have you had as you have pushed for this peace deal, but also how would you evaluate your strengths, but also your weaknesses?
I have many weaknesses as a human being. Maybe sometimes impatient, sometimes I get mad because this happens or this doesn't happen. This peace process has been very difficult. No peace process is easy. We studied many peace processes, and we took from each peace process what was applicable to Colombia. The IRA peace process, the South African peace process, the Salvadorian peace process, Sri Lanka. And I had a group of very good advisors with hands-on experience who advised me since the very beginning. If you have an objective and you want to achieve that objective, you have to persevere. I was in the Navy. I was taught sailing, and you have to have a port of destiny. You use the winds to get to that port of destiny. That's what we did with the peace process.
President, many thanks for having been with us on the Global Conversation.
Thank you very much.